Yeah, this is the Dharmanaut Circle. Usually we do it the first Sunday of every month, and the most of the ones we've done are up on YouTube. And we post the talk that I do at the beginning and the meditation, and you can access them separately. But we never record the conversation. So if you want to talk about drugs, or you want to talk about feeling crazy, or feeling whatever, it's really more a space for that kind of intimacy and sharing and vulnerability, which I find difficult to. It kind of doesn't jibe with the expose everything on the internet model. I may be revealing my age there, but that's the way that we've decided to do it. So yeah, so where to start? I'm a little bit out of it. I was traveling in a far distant time zone, and I've been back for a few days and jet lagged. But I'm also very, very exhausted and emotionally drained. My father died about a month ago. In fact, a month ago, and that has proved very interestingly challenging. And I say interestingly because it was not really what I expected, and I had a lot of people tell me that beforehand, and I'm sure people who've gone through this can nod their heads. And if you haven't, I'm passing on the word that you really don't know what it's going to look like grieving, where the hole is going to show itself, where the challenges emotionally are going to arise. And that's definitely, my experience. And the other thing that somebody told me that was really happy is because you don't know what it is, just to go with it all. Like, don't judge it at all. And I've been good about that. Like, I'm not like freaking out if I feel this or feel that. But it's really unsettled me in some ways, and made me kind of exhausted, and also very kind of intimate with some of the other difficulties that are going on, partly just in the world and in people's mental health. And I feel like I've always been a little bit of an empath, not in the Counselor Troy on Next Generation sense, but more in the like, just having a really good antenna and picking up things, including emotional things and worldview shifts, cycles, cracks. And so there's just so much going on now, that it's just, if you want to tune in to the angst, it's always available. It's like that signal is strong and shifting around the spectrum, but it's always tune-inable. So I've been sitting with a more difficulty of late, and that's partly what inspired me to talk tonight about this idea of like sitting with the trouble. And I'm kind of riffing on a phrase that the writer Donna Haraway has, where she talks about staying with the trouble. It's a great idea, and it's a great kind of part of practice, because obviously part of the reason we practice is because we are already in difficulty, and difficulties may inspire our practice, particularly given some of the discipline and tedium involved with really committing to practice. And here I'm thinking more about a meditation or spiritual practice. And with psychedelics, you're committing to the unknown, or fear, confusion, bad trips, as a possibility, particularly if you're going through, difficult stuff. And then even if things are going rosy, you're going to have your dad die, and then your mom die, and then you die. And so the trouble is sort of in the picture, let alone the trouble in the world. And that part gets really difficult. It's really difficult because, I was just hearing there's a wonderful podcast I want to recommend. I don't do that very often. It's called Musing Mind. And I've only listened to about 5 or 6 of the episodes. The guy's mostly interested in kind of economics and cognitive science, but he has a Buddhist psychedelic vein in it. It's pretty intellectual in a kind of sciencey way. He talks a lot about predictive processing. It's very much invested in that kind of sort of a neurological based view of cognition, but he's interested in spirituality and interested in psychedelics. So it's quite stimulating. He gets very, very smart guests. And this one fellow who's a cognitive science, but a scientist who also studies meditation and is a meditator, was talking about one of the situations we're in, which is that entities, beings, us, minds, are trying to, we build our little bubble worlds partly by reducing complexity into a manageable framework. And we just do that all the time. That's where you get into this idea of predictive processing, that what's happening is we're not actually experiencing the world as it is, including just what appears to be raw sensory information. Actually, what we have is a whole set of models that are internalized to our nervous system, and they are kind of making guesses based on sensory input, and it's sort of running like a virtual reality of what the world is. And one feature of that model, however true it is, it's valuable in some ways. I think in some ways it's quite true. In other ways, it kind of misses the boat, or it opens up other sorts of problems, which we can talk about if people want to talk more about it. It's not like I'm an expert in it. But one way of looking at why we model is because it reduces complexity. There's so much going on. We can't handle it all. So we kind of bring the thing down to a level that we can manage. And the complexity and ambiguity of reality is increasing dramatically, and it's not going to stop. That's just it. It's going to get worse. So the disjunct between our attempt to reduce the complexity to a manageable known world, a world where we can feel comfortable, a world where we can feel safe, where everything's familiar, the disjunct between that and the actual conditions is growing greater and greater. And if you're still optimistic about uploading consciousness or the manifestation of a whole new age worldview, then that asymptote might look cool, because it's like clearly we're on a trip to transformation. But I think most of us, and certainly myself included, are now feeling like that's happening while all the chickens are coming home, and the internal sense of progress that maybe we shared when we were younger, or other people, the West has experienced in the past, of like the sense of progressing towards an actually more equitable, more sustainable, more pleasant and self-affirming world is hard to sustain, even though the technology of the intensification and the kind of liftoff of whether it's virtual reality or cryptocurrencies or technological biotechnology, or all the sort of ways in which the mind frame of the technological engineering processes are just spreading throughout the world, throughout reality, that it's harder and harder to feel that that's part of this other kind of progress that we may have wanted at some time, which is, I think, part of the reason that, at least here in America, we're seeing, the strongest reactionary upsurge in our lifetimes. Like it was, it wasn't so great with Nixon's silent majority, but what we're seeing now is something much more ferocious, much more cruel, and much less willing to compromise, and that's also not going to go away. And so that I've been thinking a lot about that, not trying to sort of justify it, or some kind of false idea of tolerance, or some idea of like some simple idea of like, well, they have it, because I'm experiencing the horror of the implications of, say, the recent Supreme Court decisions, or watching the increasing militarization of the Christian imagination is very terrifying. And they have the guns. They're better at the guns than we are. They're better at fucking doing shit on the ground in a lot of ways than we are. And but I am trying to sort of see it in this bigger picture. And I've increasingly been just going, look, things are so crazy that tension between just the sheer complexity of reality and its intensification, that desire to simplify, to have a manageable model becomes more and more attractive. And if you can do it, or at least pretend you're doing it, or fake it till you make it, and it's communicable, that becomes very attractive. So reactionary positions, traditionalism, going back, rejecting technology, rejecting new forms of human experience, returning to some idea of a way things should be, of a pattern, written into the deep human soul, or written into tradition. This turn towards an idea of tradition, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I think in many ways, I suspect all of us have aspects of our lives or our imaginations that can jibe with that don't like the sort of techno-futuristic, highly capitalized, consumer-oriented, individualistic model of like the secular global future. We're like, no, you're missing something. There's something deeper. There's something more ancient. There's something about the patterns of nature, or the subconscious, the imagination, archetypes. There's something else going on. And what we're seeing with Christian reactionary traditionalism right now is just like that, but in this other language, and super hardcore, super unwilling to have any sympathy for the mess that modernity is. And anyway, that may be a little bit overly politicized, but I'm really kind of trying to sort of wrestle with what it feels like to be in this particular conundrum, and what both psychedelics and meditation practices have for us. And it comes back to that sense of being in a situation in which the complexity and ambiguity and even threat is increasing. And we recognize our desires to sort of, and not even desire, our need to some degree to be able to simplify the environment so that we can have at least a place to take a breath, or to feel safe, or to feel vulnerable, or to recharge our batteries, or to remember about the good things in life, or to connect with our loved ones. And, the simplest way of thinking about that is like what we do with our domestic spaces. We don't all have the privilege of having control over our domestic places. Some of us are in relationships that are difficult, or we're broke ass, and so we're in some situation that's not ideal, or we're with our parents for some reason, or whatever it is. There's not an ideal situation, but even in like the space of your room, or the space of your bed, or the whatever, there's the sense of being able to craft a kind of, not simplified, but a sort of congenial region that doesn't deny the outside world, but it creates a boundary. And there's always that tension. And one of the things that psychedelics do is that they temporarily kind of break down those boundaries. Even if you're in your cozy room with all your cozy things, suddenly they can look menacing and bizarre, or become goofy, or start running across the walls, and the walls are actually melting. And then we're not home anymore. There's no home. We're homeless. We're off in the universe. We're off in the infinite. And that sense of increasing complexity, particularly as you're coming on, the sense that the rug is pulled out from under you, there's deeper patterns afoot, all the thoughts that you're bringing up that are still your normal everyday thoughts, trying to manage it, aren't working anymore. And that can be very difficult. Like, a lot of people don't enjoy coming on. I don't particularly enjoy coming on some substances more than others. But in some ways, that's as much of a teaching as anything in the psychedelic experience. And because in a way it's like training wheels for, yeah, it's actually really complex, ambiguous, and scary now, and is going to get more that way. Not just that it's not going to go back, it's going to get more. Climate change is going to get more. The weirdness of virtual reality and fintech and whatever, even if there's a crash, it's just going to get more. The confusion factor, and it's unfortunate. And so that's an aspect of psychedelics, and the ability to know that you can move through those ambiguous spaces and find yourself connected to deeper sources of being, senses of connection with the planet, with ourselves, a deep acceptance of the difficulty of things, maybe an understanding that however much we might want things to be differently and even work towards things to be differently, that some of this stuff has just been in the cards for a really long time. And it's a chicken coming home situation that there's only so much that we can do about it. We're riding a much larger process that goes much deeper and longer than just the Republicans. So that's, I think, part of the value of psychedelics that people don't really talk about as much, the way that it does freak you out or does confuse you. It does force you to let go of the known and to recognize how much you're attached to it, and to appreciate it when you come back, and to appreciate it even knowing now, maybe in a way you didn't before, that it's not quite all that it seems, and to still be able to appreciate that. To be able to, and because this is really key. Now that we have 24-hour news cycle, now that you have social media in your brain, now that you're carrying little computers around with you everywhere you go, that it's harder and harder to be able to step back and be in a bubble that's not a bubble of denial. I'm not talking about drinking beer and smoking weed and watching Netflix. That's a certain kind of whatever, cocooning, only goes so far. But the active, awake, hopeful, celebratory, loving kind of bubble, like the kind of thing you can do with friends at a dinner party, playing games together, playing music together, being in the park, tripping together outside. That sense, we have to be able to affirm ourselves in that, because if we can't do that consciously, then the only thing we're going to do is to go into addictions or into sloth or into, beer and Netflix, as a way to give ourselves a break temporarily from the intensity of trying to grapple with reality, knowing that we're not even coming close, even in the few little slivers that we know something about. Even if you're just paying attention to the changing the nature of fire in climate, just fire, just that. It's so complicated. There's so much going on. There's so many theories. There's so much change. There's so much dynamics. So we have to be able to consciously kind of recover and refine those sources within our ordinary lives and within our imaginal lives. And, again, I feel like that's one of the gifts of psychedelics, is that they model both the difficulties and the discovery of those spaces, those sources, those places of richness within the turmoil. And meditation, I think, provides a different set of responses to that situation, because my experience of it, and increasingly the way I practice, and that will sort of guide a little bit our meditation tonight, is it's like the ability, it's not so much about building a little familiar boundaried cocoon that simplifies and manages the world that outside of it is too chaotic. that sort of like, I'm a boundary, I'm a bubble, I'm in a bubble. Even our bodies are like that, that our skin is like this kind of boundary within which we can have these homeostatic processes. And the skin keeps the craziness of the world kind of manageable for the most part. And, but on another level, there's no skin, there's no boundary. I am in the world's in me, there's no boundary. And you see that in psychedelics, you see that in meditation, but there's an opportunity to open up to a greater groundless ground, a way of being at home in homelessness, an embrace of surfing the void or surfing the dissolution of the known. And that quality of sort of being able to be up for the dissolution and to feel even comfortable in the dissolution, to feel comfortable in the void, is one, I believe, of the deeper trainings of meditation, that whether or not it fits into your ultimate model of what awakening is or enlightenment or whatever, I don't care. But for where we are now, historically, culturally, it's a great, it's a very, very useful way to be. One of the ways of, I think there's a tendency both with psychedelics and with meditation, and it makes total sense. And I did it too. And I still think it's actually a good thing to even teach to people, especially people who are starting out. It's like you throw out the bait of the yummy stuff, like keep on meditating, kid, and you'll get some bliss. And let me tell you, it's really good. I mean, it can be better than an orgasm. I'm not kidding, really. So we got the cookies are out there, there, and the same thing with psychedelics. It's like, oh, it's wonderment, and you're connected with everything, and it's great, and that stuff is great. But it might be the case that in both of these cases, that stuff is there to the degree that it is there for a reason, which may not be, may just be the way things are. But to the degree it's there for a reason, what it may actually be there for is to charge up your batteries so you can go back and do the work. And the work is more gnarly, whether you're talking, far out psychedelia, or whether you're talking those moments in far out psychedelia where you suddenly actually understand the horrors of our historical moment without the normal illusions of agency and narrative kind of stripped away. And you're like, we're doing what? Like, there's this kind of clarity there. Or some of the things one wrestles with in meditation, including death, wrestling with death, with your own death, with other people's death, with dissolution, with the fact that all of your ideas and stories about how things are and how you want things to be, while we need them and we're still going to work within them in our ordinary lives, they don't really exist. You can't take anything with you. Everything you love, everything you know will be stripped away from you, including you, the identity you think you have. So that's, let's be honest, that's kind of heavy. And part of the work, I think, is this balance of being able to really appreciate the joy and really be able to celebrate and to manifest and to enjoy, but not as an escape. Because if you don't have any of that, it's going to be pretty hard. You might get really depressed. You might lose your thread. And I say that as someone who can be depressed. That the ability to kind of cultivate this stuff is really important, but it's not the same thing as hiding in it or indulging in it or cordoning it off from the rest of the world. So I think part of the alchemy of this deeper practice, and I think psychedelics, particularly ayahuasca, are very supportive of this, where you're introduced to the possibility of having joy and wonderment in the suffering or the horror or the shadow work, if you want to call it that way. And that there's this blend that can be, these connections that can start to happen that are very subtle, and they're hard to articulate because it's not the way we're wired, where the bad stuff's over here and the good stuff's over here. And now I'm enjoying myself and now I'm not enjoying myself, where those things, start to weave together. And, you got to remember that if part of what we're moving to is something like oneness in meditation and psychedelics, another way of thinking about that oneness is non-dualism. It's like there's not an other, there's not another thing. There's just this. And in a way, I think unity sometimes is not the best way of thinking about it. I prefer saying non-dual because there's still a sense that there's a lot going on, whereas the unity thing, I think, can get people, there's kind of a sentimentality about it that I don't think is always helpful. But if things are non-dual, then that means that the good stuff and the bad stuff are woven together, and that we might, however much we see difficulties in the world or horrible political developments, the cruelties of capitalism, the domination, brainwashing of contemporary technology, and the sense that things don't have to be this way, they could be elsewise. That's true. They could be other. There is this contingency in our experience. And at the same time, this is where we are, and it's woven in with our joys, our hopes, our loves on some deep, deep, deep level. And that part of navigating the challenges of it is to accept it to the degree that, I guess just there is a degree of acceptance to it. Acceptance at the very least that this is what is arising, that it is that complicated and ambiguous and difficult and scary. But not having that then become an excuse for either pessimism, doom scrolling addiction to just constant exposure to how screwed up everything is, or addictions and hiding and cocooning, but some deeper alchemy of joy amidst the challenges. And another way that I think meditation can do that, and this is, I hope this comes through, is that, I don't know, imagine you're in a coma for a long time, but you kind of know you're like super fuzzed out. Nothing makes sense. It's not like a coma, like you're completely out of it. Let's say it's like you're just fuzzed out, just like nothing works. You're hardly getting any signal at all from reality. And then suddenly you wake up, bam, and it's just like a fresh Monday, fresh morning, the lights coming in, you hear the birds, you're in your body, and there's a vibrancy to just our basic experience of reality. Not completely free of content. Maybe it wasn't a bird, maybe it was a bus. Maybe it's a cloud of exhaust coming through the window and not a pleasant breeze. Doesn't matter. There's a freshness and a crispness to the experiencing of phenomenal reality that is itself already, without you doing anything, joy. Not happiness, but joy, but aliveness. And so I throw out these metaphors: crispness, clarity, vibrancy, and they're all pointing to something that isn't quite those words. And it's very fundamental to awareness itself. It's this quality of awakeness that is beneath all the layers of your specific perceptions of this thing or that thing, of your thoughts about your perceptions of this thing or that thing, of how you're settled in your body, of where your emotional state is, of, what your plans are, what's going on in your head. And that part of the invitation of meditation is to tune into that fundamental vibrancy, which you're not creating. It's always already there. And if the hardcore meditators are right, it doesn't even really go away, even in deep sleep, if you're really tuned in. I mean, I don't have that experience, but I know enough people who have that I believe them, that there's kind of this baseline freshness to awareness that is always there. And that means it's there in the waiting room of the hospital while your dad's dying. It's there when the cloud of exhaust from the bus comes in your window and it stinks. It's there throughout all of your experiences. And so the ability or the invitation to tune into that freshness, that awakeness, means that in a way, you have a tool or a strategy or a way of being in the midst of difficulties where you're not completely oppressed by them, completely shut out by them from your sources. I mean, sometimes, of course, things are happening. If you're in terrible pain, you're in terrible pain. It doesn't matter whether you can tune into, higher states of consciousness or not. I mean, that was Ram Dass, one of Ram Dass's lessons from his stroke. I'll never forget. I wish I still had it. There was I think it was one of the first interviews with him after his stroke, and it was Jack Kornfield and a couple of other old buddies, and it was in some Buddhist magazine, not Tricycle, and they asked him. They were like, Ram Dass, you had this stroke. It was super gnarly. What you had decades of practice of bliss of what was it like? And he goes, yeah, it's a struggle. It's like there's your mind, and then there's pain, and well, pain won. So it's not like, okay, now we have a way out. We could just go into awareness and it doesn't matter what happens. Obviously, in some cases that's not possible. But it is possible through more and more and more of your life. And, I'm wrestling with it. It's really hard to do. Like, I get into super anxious, dread-filled, kind of, self-lacerating jags. That's my particular flavor of personal, neurotic hell. And it's hard. I'm like, where's the flavor here? This doesn't seem like a flavor. It just seems like a bummer ride I can't get off. So it's a work in progress. But I have had enough experiences of that freshness in the midst of difficulty to really feel that it's worth pursuing. So that kind of mixture of difficulty of sitting with the trouble, and sitting with it, meaning opening to it, if not quite embracing it, then not demanding that it go away and be anything other than it is, but also recognizing in that very gesture a certain kind of vibrancy, a certain kind of awakeness that is itself a sense of, if not bliss, or even if joy sounds a little bit excessive, a kind of fundamental aliveness, or even a goodness in the midst of these kinds of challenges. So that's my opening riff, and let's do some meditating. So feel free to turn off the screen, get into a comfortable situation, sit on a pillow, sit on a chair. My only request is, if you sit on a chair, you don't lean up against the back of the chair, that you inch forward on the edge so that your back is free and clear, and holding itself up on its own, on your own. It's a good metaphor for sitting. And some of these postural things are really just, in a way, kind of embodied metaphors, where your body is being the way your spirit is opening to. So with that in mind, you roll your hips forward. Make sure that lower back is a little bit curved. And the reason you're doing that is you're wanting to create a situation where your spine is balanced, almost like a stack of plates that a circus performer is balancing, where even if the plates aren't quite the same size, that you can still balance them all. So you've got that base of in your pelvis rolling forward, and this natural S curve, this snaky quality is manifesting in the spine. And you help that along also by opening up the chest, rolling the shoulders gently back down your back, allowing that chest to open up, even pull forward ever so slightly, tucking your chin and tugging up the top of your skull. We go through this pretty much every time we sit, but in my experience, attention to posture is as important as attention to breath. And these sort of principles, rolling the hips forward, opening up the chest, tucking the chin, pulling the back of the head up, all of those can be returned to in a practice the way you return to your breath. And some of you might find that it's actually better than returning to your breath. And it's just as groovy. Your body's always there. Your breath is always there. These are your foundations as you practice. So let's just find that set, and you can let yourself wiggle and sway a little bit, even move around just a tad, and gently find yourself in as balanced a position as you can. Again, what you're looking for is a balance of relaxation, release, and a sense of being upright, a kind of brightness in the posture. These are the two energetic poles of meditation. The Buddha compared it to tuning a stringed instrument. A little bit slack is a little bit relaxed. Tune it up. A little bit sharp, too tight, relax it. Find the middle way, the clear, ringing tone in between these poles. And you can invite that into your posture. Now, allow your attention to encounter the breath just as it is. Notice where you are drawn to this encounter, at your nose and your throat, your belly, your lungs. Doesn't really matter. But anywhere you are, notice it's the same pattern. relaxation on the out breath, even a sense of final release, and then the vibrancy of the in breath, the same pace as the ocean tides, waves coming in and off the shore, expansion, contraction. So while we can use both the breath and the posture to as objects to allow us to calm the mind, the chatter of the mind, the monkey mind, recognize that the posture and the breath are also, I don't want to say symbols, but they're also manifesting something even deeper about the practice. They're not just things to bring your mind back to. They are also awakening in themselves, just as they are. The beginning is the end. So here we're inviting the mind to calm, the thoughts to reduce their intensity, see through their glamour, and use the breath or the posture to settle down. Allow yourself to feel any sensations and even feel the movement of thought, if you can, as a kind of sensation, like a tension in the body or an itch. That there's a kind of energy in the thought, just as there is in the sense of your heart beating or your blood moving. So as we calm, leaning on the breath or the posture to whatever degree we're called to, include within that a sort of tuning in to the energy feeling, the vibrancy, the vibrating quality of sensation, thought, feeling. It might even feel a little electrical, like a very mellow current running through your body. And rest in that vibrancy. In a way, we're simplifying the model. Instead of the difference between this thought and that thought, it's just thinking. And thinking is riding a kind of energy, a feeling, a vibratory quality. And the twinge in your knee, that one particular place, is also just a nerve firing. And the firing of the nerve firing is just in you. It's not at the knee. It's not in your brain. It's just vibrancy. You can feel it. Rest in that vibrancy. Now I want to invite you to allow a sense of spaciousness to arise, or rather, notice the spaciousness that is already present. It's as if that vibratory quality we've tuned into is enlivening a great space. It might be room-sized. It might be galaxy-sized. But you can think of it like a great clearing in a forest. So if you've been walking through the trees, through the brush, glints of light, lots of shadow, and then you pass through the trees and there's this great spacious meadow. You can see the sky, you can see far. And if it helps, you can stay with that image or simply open to the sense of spaciousness. But it's a real sense, not just an idea. allow that space to be enlivened with your energy, with the energy through the focus you've developed or the sense of intimacy with breath or posture. That little bit of power charges this sense of space. Clarity, vibrancy. Just rest in this energized, spacious awareness. This bright awakeness. Opening up here and staying here is a fine meditation in itself, but I would like to invite you to do something else now, which is to consciously invite into this space or to emerge in this clearing from the trees something difficult. It might be a pain that is already in your body. It might be a current difficulty that's already weighing on your mind, that's already produced some of the distraction you probably felt, or something you know is looming or arising of late, physical, relational, emotional. Recognize you have enough space for it simply to be there in the way that it is coming now, whatever face or facet is appearing. There's enough space to neither react, cling, fix. Just let it be there for now. It's okay to want it to go away. But like an animal that might maul you, if you get up close now, there's enough space you can see it, appreciate how it moves, that it has its own logic, its own reasons for being. If it's a problem that you've been stewing over, thinking about, try not to tune into the thoughts too much, even though that's inevitably part of the picture. And really what we're trying to touch here is the underlying feeling. Confusion, indecision, anger. What does it feel like? This is another middle way. We're not just looking at it, analyzing it like Spock. That's too tight, too bright. and we're not just indulging in it or repeating it. We're allowing it to appear as a feeling as well as a problem. It may be uncomfortable. It may be reactive. You may be going into fixing or bemoaning or just feeling pain. But try to, again, sort of simplify it into vibrancy, your own awareness of its presence, of its dynamics. If it starts to feel oppressive, or you want it to go away, or you want to stop the meditation, instead become curious about its particular quality, its particular vibration, or a smell, or a taste, a texture. It may not be pleasant. It may actively be difficult, but it still has its unique signature that you, in recognizing, bring to light. And by bringing to light, we are also bringing to vibration. Anger is an energy. Pain is an energy. Confusion is an energy. We are energy. If you can, refresh that sense of spaciousness so things don't get too close, too overwhelming. And here, with your sense of spaciousness, with your awareness, with your feeling for the energetics, see what happens. See what sides of itself this animal, pain, challenge, difficulty reveals in this clearing we've created. And it's okay to want it to go away. If you can, allow this focused issue to dissolve into this vibratory space. Might be a little challenging, that's fine. You can, of course, return to the breath, to the posture. Just sort of don't push it away, but allow it to dissipate into the field if you can. You don't have to love it. You don't have to hate it, but it's part of your field. And just check in with yourself a little bit and, give yourself a pat on the back for letting that in. And whatever happens was good. All right, let's end the meditation there. Thanks for going on the journey with me. I've definitely been doing something like that myself lately. This morning, actually, I partly because I'm not really sure why. I think I might have been still fatigued, but I was a little nauseous all morning. And so when I sat, I was like, oh, I'm actually kind of nauseous. And there was a part of me that was like, yeah, man, but you can like do that like peaceful meditation thing where like everything gets really vibratory and yummy and you'll probably feel better. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm just gonna hang out with the nausea. And nausea, as you probably all realize, is very peculiar. It has a unique signature of the unpleasant. And there's something existential about it, more so, I think, than other kinds of, related unpleasantries. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote a whole existentialist novel called Nausea, a sort of way of feeling not at ease with the world or yourself, a sort of a lack of ground, that quality of vertigo, inside and out. And I was really trying to stay with it. And again, like just kind of like not bring it on, not make it go away, not love it, not hate it, but just kind of taste it, not even appreciate it, not even accept it. I mean, it wasn't anything I could do about it because it was there. So this is definitely stuff I've been working with. Maybe we'll stop the recording, Greg,